think you're good to go.
All right, sounds great. Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone's staying warm in this absolutely frigid weather lately, though today I guess is still supposed to be better than what we're heading for the weekend. Um, I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today, and we're really fortunate to have two very, very knowledgeable and phenomenal lobbyists with us today. They're CTCPA's contract lobbyists, and I've had the pleasure of knowing them for quite a while before I even joined the society, and that is Craig Leroy and Dallas Dodge. So we're going to ask them a bunch of questions regarding the upcoming session in hopes of getting a better idea of what this session will be like, both in terms of process, as well as some of the issues that are going to be covered. So I guess my first question to you, gentlemen, is, the session opens today. Can you walk our members through what the opening of a Connecticut legislative session looks like and what makes a short session so different?
Sure. Thank you, Bonnie, and for everybody who might have missed the introduction. My name is Dallas Dodge. I'm the managing partner of Roy and Leroy Government Relations. We are the lobbying firm for CTCPAs at the Capitol. I'm joined by Craig Leroy, who's the founder of the firm and is a senior advisor to us now. And I just want to emphasize at the beginning, it really is a privilege to represent the interests of the CPAs at the Capitol. You guys are a great client in the sense of, responsiveness is everything when we're dealing with the issues that we are at the General Assembly. And Bonnie and her team are always great. And, all of the members who she looks to support the information that we need to get to legislators in terms of helping us tell the story that we need to tell on your behalf and to influence legislation to the extent that we can. So as Bonnie said, today is the opening day of the 2026 legislative session. This is what is called a short session. So the General Assembly operates on 2-year cycles, where in the odd numbered years, those are usually the first, or not usually, they always are, the first year where you have a new General Assembly that's being seated, and they serve 2-year terms, both the House and the Senate. The odd numbered years, what we call long sessions, are where the legislature usually takes on sort of meatier, more substantive issues. Those sessions usually run from January to, or do run from January to June. And that is also when the legislature sets the 2-year biennial state budget. And so usually the state budget takes up a lot of the oxygen during a long session. But again, because of the length of it, and legislators are allowed to propose bills on any subject that they want, there's more substantive work that's done during the long session as well. During the short session, which runs this year from February 4th to May 6th, legislators are a little bit more confined in terms of what individual legislators can propose. They are technically only allowed to propose bills on budget adjustments. And committees, however, can raise bills on any subject that they want. Most of the discussion during a short session is on budget adjustments because we're mid-cycle through the 2-year biennial state budget. And so they're not adopting a new state budget, but looking at what adjustments might need to be made to the budget that was adopted the previous year. So were there shortfalls? Were there revenues that were less than anticipated? Obviously, this year, I think a big focus of discussion will be the impact of the big beautiful bill and changes to federal legislation, how that may impact the state budget. But the session really kicks off with the governor's annual budget address, which we colloquially call the State of the State address. So that happens at noon today when the governor will propose his suggested budget adjustments for the biennial budget. And it's also when the governor will propose his governor's bills or policy agenda. So the governor, as of right, is allowed to propose bills on any subject that he wants, and those will get referred out to and raised by the various committees. And a lot of times that that's really the first opportunity to sort of set the tone for the agenda. So the governor, obviously, and we'll talk about a little bit later in the call, is running for reelection this year to a third term. And so a lot of his budget proposals will really reflect, in a sense, what the type of campaign is that he's intending to run on next year. It'll signal to the legislature what his priorities are for the upcoming session. And then over the next few days, we'll start seeing the priority legislation from the House and the Senate start coming out. For the Senate, usually their priority bills from a leadership perspective are Senate bills 1 through 10. And for the House, they usually have a handful of priority bills as well. And so those have already been uploaded to the system today. We're starting to review them for clients. And that'll give us a sense of both. So by the end of today, we'll have a sense of both the governor's agenda for the session and then what direction both leadership in the House and the Senate would like to go. During a short session, everything is extremely compressed. All of the committee deadlines hit very quickly. Most of the committees are required to report out their bills by the end of March. So you only have about a little less than 2 months from the beginning of session for committees to raise bills, hold public hearings on those bills, and then vote them out to the floor. The session ends on May 6th. So again, there's only about a month between the end of the committee deadlines and when the legislature requires what we call sine die, which means end of days in Latin, and is the constitutional adjournment for the legislature. In Connecticut, we do technically have a part-time legislature. So the legislature is only in regular session for certain months of the year, and that a constitutional adjournment is really significant because any bill that is not passed by the constitutional adjournment date is dead. Bills don't carry over from one session to the next. The legislature, unlike some other states, is not continuously coming in for session days where they might work over the summer or stuff. There are occasionally special sessions where they might come in after a regular session has adjourned to deal with either an emergency that has come up or to try and get to some priority legislation that they weren't able to finish during the regular course of business. But for all intents and purposes, May 6th is the big date where if legislation has not passed by then, it is effectively dead. So that's kind of a broad overview, Bonnie, of the session, the mechanics of it, and what we'll be dealing with this year.
Great. Just want to let everyone know that the attendance verification question's up. Thanks, Dallas. I appreciate that. What I would really appreciate your and Craig touching on are the key issues that are likely to dominate the session at a high level. What's already being talked about that we know is going to take up quite a bit of time during this legislative session.
Sure.
Let me say a couple things. Dallas just did a thorough, brilliant job kind of outlining how the session goes. And let me talk for just a minute how I see some of what is going to drive the General Assembly. Obviously, it's going to be, again, fiscal matters. And not to go too far back, but in the past, we in Connecticut, when we had a fiscal crisis, passed what have now been termed fiscal guardrails, which basically put Connecticut on a sustainable fiscal path. It had to do with monies that come in under what is called our volatility cap, money that is now sequestered off into a reserve fund to help pay down long-term liabilities, a spending cap, a revenue cap that only allows 98.75% of revenue projected to come in to be spent. And that has been and will be a tug throughout this General Assembly. We have, and Dallas, if I'm off on the numbers a little bit, correct me, but what I saw was we currently have about a rainy day fund over $5 billion. And we have been consistently paying down pension debt and obligations that we ran up and did not take care of for many years. There is going to be a continued tension within the General Assembly over some of the more, what I guess I would term progressive elements of the General Assembly, saying we are saving too much in the rainy day fund. We have needs, especially based upon what has happened with the federal government as far as cutbacks. And we need to basically ease up on the guardrails to allow some of that money to flow to the state budget to address some of the needs that Connecticut sees. The governor, for the most part, has been steadfast in protecting the guardrails and has not allowed that to happen. Now, the General Assembly back in Dallas, again, correct me if I'm wrong, December, came into special session and allocated, I believe, $500 million out of that the leaders and the governor could use to fill some of the holes in the state budget based upon cutbacks in regard to nutritional programs, SNAP benefits, Medicaid cutbacks that would have to be agreed upon. But there's going to be continued talk and action about trying to somehow lessen the guardrails so that more money can be used for what legitimately some folks think are needs in the state of Connecticut. And I think that will be a major issue that will be talked about through the General Assembly. Dallas, how did I do on that one?
Good. The one thing I would add is on that last point, that will actually be one of the first topics that the legislature takes up this session. Tomorrow, we expect both the House and the Senate to come in for emergency legislation to reappropriate that emergency funding that they gave the governor some discretion for at the end of last year. The issue is they set aside that $500 million and the executive was given the authority to spend it on certain social welfare programs. And that authority sunsetted at the beginning of the new session. And so there's emergency legislation that they'll take up tomorrow to continue that authority for him throughout the duration of the session as they come up with a budget adjustment that allows the legislature to have a little bit more say in how that money is spent. But that'll be one of the first issues that they tackle tomorrow. It will not be the end of the discussion by any means. It's simply a continuation of the stopgap to allow the governor to continue plugging those holes that were created by the federal budget while the legislature can work throughout the rest of the session to come up with their own set of budget adjustments.
That's helpful. Thank you.
The other issue, Bonnie, that you'll hear about, and Craig did a great job summarizing sort of the broader fiscal discussions that'll be happening at the legislature. And that's really been a shift in mindset for both the legislature and lobbyists. Craig's been around for a lot longer than I have, but when I first started in this more than a decade ago, Connecticut was in what one former OPM secretary coined a state of permanent fiscal crisis. And I never thought that I would see a day where every session we were, looking for a new industry to take out back and shoot it in the head by imposing new taxes or something like that, because there really was no light at the end of the tunnel in terms of righting the state's fiscal ship. The fiscal guardrails have really changed the dynamic of the legislature, where we are no longer operating in this state of permanent fiscal crisis. And we've shifted from where the discussion is, how can we raise new revenue and what programs do we need to slash to, we have too much revenue coming in and are we oversaving that? Or should we be spending it on new programming? So that's been a really interesting shift in dynamic that's only really happened over the last 5 years at the General Assembly. A few other. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Let me add on one thing to Dallas. If I just add one other thing besides what Dallas and I have kind of outlined. I mean, there's another issue that all of you it should be near and dear to you, over not just how much money we have, but how the equity of our current tax system. And you will hear again about millionaire tax. You've seen Connecticut, or excuse me, Massachusetts passed by referendum a millionaire's tax. Rhode Island, not quite the same, but did what's called the Taylor Swift tax on property taxes to raise new revenue. And there's a lot of buzz about in other states about wealth taxes. And there will be continued voices in our legislature saying that our tax system is unequitable right now and that it needs to be more progressive. That's different than just raising revenue. It has to do with the fairness of the current system. Back to you, Dad.
Yeah, so the other really broad topics, and probably the most broadest, is this concept of affordability. Obviously, that's become kind of a national buzzword, but you're seeing it in a lot of more state and local discussion too, in terms of the cost of living. A few drivers that, I think the legislature feels like they have some ability to influence. I think one of the most significant aspects of that concept of affordability is electricity prices. That impacts everybody from individual consumers and how much they're paying and how much it costs to live here, to businesses and how expensive their energy bills are. It's an issue where I said the legislature thinks that it has some ability to influence it, but the reality is there's really no good solution to it. New England is very constrained in terms of its ability to produce cheap energy. There's been a push, obviously, towards greater renewables. And Connecticut, like other New England states, had really put a lot of put its eggs in the basket of offshore solutions like offshore wind. You're seeing more discussion about potentially creating new nuclear energy. And even some discussion that even though the governor had set very ambitious decarbonization goals at the beginning of his first administration, whether we need to have a little bit more of a bridge in terms of building up some of our natural gas infrastructure. In terms of other costs of living and stuff, obviously inflation continues to be a big topic of discussion. And how can we make life more affordable for both consumers and the businesses that are looking to do business here? Coming back to the energy subject, I will say that I think, especially for our DCD commissioner, which is the Department of Economic and Community Development, you're seeing this reflected in some of the governor's other talking points. There's broad recognition that energy costs are really driving a lot of business decisions, especially for manufacturers and people who are high energy users in terms of whether they want to locate to the state and continue to operate here. The other discussion that I think and would certainly have an impact on both CPAs and a lot of your clients who you consult for is artificial intelligence. So AI has been a huge topic of discussion at the legislature for the last few years. There is one state senator, James Maroney, who is the chairman of the General Law Committee, who has made AI regulation a passion project of his. And I think it stems from a frustration that on the one hand, you have, and I think the governor falls more into this camp, people who are saying, AI should really be regulated at the federal level. And even though the president did issue an executive order that tried to take a step towards state preemption of AI regulation and coming up with some sort of uniform set of federal standards, that still hasn't taken effect yet. And so as long as there's that sort of gap, you're going to see this discussion around AI regulation. Now, Senator Maroney, who is sort of the leader on this, is fortunately really one of the more thoughtful legislators at the state capitol. And the last few years, his proposals, I think on a substantive level, have actually been very reasonable. And I think from a broad business standpoint, It's something that generally I don't think create too many compliance hurdles, but there is this concern that it would create unique burdens for Connecticut businesses that aren't present for businesses or for companies doing business in other states. And that's really been the governor's concern on this issue is that Connecticut, especially with our small market share and small size, should not be one of the first states leading with its chin in terms of adopting AI regulations. And the last few sessions is as good of a place as I think some of the AI proposals have gotten to, where they would not have been overly burdensome, excuse me, on Connecticut businesses. They've always died at the end of the session because the governor has actually threatened vetoes at various points. And I don't think you've ever seen meaningful AI regulation pass both chambers in the last few years. This year does feel a little bit different. I think the governor is recognizing that, for especially with a campaign coming up, that there is a public appetite to regulate AI in a more meaningful way. Um, and especially with the continued paralysis in Washington, I think the argument that, this is really something that the federal government needs to do is losing a little bit more traction. You just kind of get a sense this year that something on AI might actually happen. Now, what that something is really broad-based because AI obviously impacts every aspect of our lives now. So I think in terms of like, broad areas, there's discussions about like the use of facial recognition software, that like big box stores use and stuff for security purposes, and maybe some smaller companies too. Also, chatbots. There's a lot of concern about the interaction of chatbots, not really from a business perspective, although the regulation likely would bleed over into that, but more in terms of like children's privacy and children's security. There's been a lot of concern with some recent stories where you've had chatbots that have convinced children to do things that they shouldn't do, or even adult users of chatbots getting catfished and that type of stuff. And so, I think making sure that chatbots are being used by companies in a reasonable way is going to be a major focus of discussion. That'll be both on sort of the commercial side, how are businesses using chatbots, especially for like help functions or for solicitations and that sort of thing. But then the real focus will be more on social media companies and how are their chatbots regulated from that perspective. And then always data privacy is a big discussion that sort of is its own issue, but does cross over into AI, where what type of data are companies collecting on customers and how are they using that data? What kind of privacy protections are in place for that? There's a lot of concern about data brokers, where even though you yourself might not be a data broker, a lot of times if you're selling your data or if you're buying data, you're doing that through a data broker. And so making sure that there's adequate privacy protections in place for that. On the
And on
privacy
that
front,
front, just before you leave the data privacy, Dallas, I just would like to remind everyone that there were protections put in several years ago for people that have a data breach, that if you follow certain standards related to your industry, and you can talk to your IT person to make sure that you're complying with these, there are significant protections in place for you. So just a reminder that there are ways to protect yourselves in terms of not only trying to prevent the data breach, but if one should happen, if you followed certain standards where you've got additional protection. So legislature did implement those. Go
yeah, it's
ahead.
a great point, Bonnie. And that's where the data privacy discussion now is more tweaks to our existing data privacy law. Connecticut was one of the first states to adopt a comprehensive data privacy law that has actually become a model for other states to adopt. I think there's a handful of other states that have now adopted legislation that is modeled on the Connecticut Act. But data privacy, usually the big fight that business has on that issue is there's a continued push, especially by the trial bar and even the attorney general, to create more and more private rights of action for data breaches and that type of stuff. So right now, as Bonnie said, if you're following certain standards, you are generally protected. But there's always an effort to create more torts based on data breaches and that sort of thing, and to give individuals a private right of action against companies that might have a data breach. In terms of other topics for the session, a lot of it will be more on sort of from a business perspective. Workforce development is a big topic, especially in healthcare. We're seeing a nursing shortage. Also, we don't have enough general practitioners in medicine right now, and so trying to make sure that those pipelines are built up. I know that from a manufacturing perspective, especially with our defense manufacturing industry, they're having a very difficult time filling jobs, and making sure that people can get the certifications that they need for those. That's been a primary focus for Electric Boat. And then even for professional services, I know it's been an area of concern for the CPAs as well, that making sure that our workforce pipeline is adequate. And then you'll see.
Let me swing over to the let me swing over to the finance committee for just 1 minute, since all of you folk here are dealing with trying to absorb what took place in Washington in regard to the tax bill that was enacted. I'm sure all of you are under the gun, both for business and personal clients, as far as compliance with that. I do think it's going to be interesting to see in Connecticut what provisions of the federal tax act is allowed to be put into place for Connecticut on the Connecticut basis. Bonnie and I go way back long enough before Dallas, where we had issues of decoupling, where the federal government would create incentives for business or individuals to take certain actions, and then Connecticut would decide that they did not want those to be able to be utilized in the state of Connecticut for tax purposes. I think that is going to be an issue of discussion in the Finance Committee. I can't tell you what issues, but obviously all of you intuitively get that if they are not taking advantage of federal incentives, it keeps revenue flowing into the state of Connecticut and doesn't decrease revenue based upon what the feds do. So it's something that I think we're going to have to be following, just to see what the governor and DRS proposes in regard to the federal legislation.
And one sort of echo of that too, Craig, that we've seen from the first Trump administration in the tax reform that was adopted 5 years ago, is one thing that directly impacts all of you is, as an example, the pass-through entity tax and trying to restore that tax credit to 90%. CBIA, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, continues to push that so that LLCs are not unfairly treated for that purpose. There hasn't been much appetite by the governor or the legislature to raise the pass-through entity tax credit back up to its original 90%. But that'll continue to be a discussion this session as well. And one thing I should have mentioned too in the affordability discussion is the cost of healthcare. That's obviously a major cost driver for most businesses, the cost of providing healthcare to their employees. We've seen fairly significant rate increases from a lot of health plans across the state in recent years, which are driven by a number of dynamics, especially on the provider side of things. And there's still discussion about how to create more affordable health options, especially for small businesses. One thing that I think you'll see a lot of discussion of this year is the creation of some sort of a public option on healthcare, where there might be an opportunity for businesses or nonprofits to effectively buy into the state health plan. CBIA has been pushing an alternative too, which would be the creation of association health plans that would allow associations like the CPAs or the Bar Association or other trade groups to create their own self-funded health plans that their members could buy into. But the cost of healthcare is also going to be a huge discussion.
Going back to the decoupling for a second, one of the reasons that's been such a hassle in the past for our members is oftentimes these pieces of legislation are adopted and applied retroactively. You know that, Craig. We've worked on a lot of that stuff in Dallas. You and I have worked on that as well. So just curious, when we met with the DRS, they didn't have any plans yet, but without a doubt, they're always thinking about exactly what you just said, Craig, because they can stop, in their opinion, a loss of revenue for the state. Do you believe that there are discussions now, and we should be concerned about the possible retroactivity or retro aspect of any bills that are passed this session?
I don't know if I certainly maybe Dee has heard more on the specifics of retroactivity. I can't opine on yet. I do believe we've heard whispers over some decoupling issues
Yeah.
on it. So it's something, Bonnie, we're just going to have to track what it's as far as what we actually see. I don't know, Dallas, if you've heard anything different.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest decoupling issue that we know about so far is the governor's going to propose today a decoupling from the federal standard for the depreciation of research and development tax credits, which really impacts more manufacturers, biopharma, aerospace, defense, that type of thing. I think there'll be a few other smaller decoupling proposals that are probably also included. In terms of whether those are retroactive or prospective, I think we'll know after today when the governor's proposal is out what direction DRS at least wants to go on that.
Okay, thank you. Dallas, you were talking about the different things in terms of affordability, and we did see that the Rhode Island governor in his State of the State address earlier in January, that was his big thing as well. And we already know that housing's a big issue in Connecticut. And I would imagine we expect it to remain one, given the fact that we're trying to recruit people into Connecticut, but there's not a lot of places for them to go. Are we expecting housing to remain a top issue this year?
I think it'll stay a high topic in terms of whether you see actual legislation on it. The legislature did adopt during a special session earlier this year comprehensive housing reform, which did a few things. Number one, it provided some financial incentives for municipalities to approve more affordable housing developments. There's money that was set aside for brownfield redevelopment, as an example. The grant that people qualify for redeveloping brownfields, especially for affordable housing projects, increased from $3 million to $6 million a project. There were more financial incentives that were established for transit-oriented development, which helps municipalities site affordable housing around like transportation centers, train stations, bus stations, that type of thing. And then there were also some mandates that were imposed on municipalities that restricts their ability to impose requirements on certain housing projects. One of the biggest discussions has been how much parking do you need for housing right now? And so there were new restrictions imposed on the degree to which municipalities can mandate minimum parking requirements for housing projects. It used to be a municipality could really, impose almost anything. Now there's a mechanism where, as long as the developer presents a credible traffic study that says that for a certain size development they have enough parking, that would be sufficient for a municipal approval. So I think the topic, Bonnie, will stay top of mind, but in terms of actual reforms, I think most of that was done during the special session. You might see some cleanup items and stuff done this session, but I think the special session really took a lot of the oxygen out of the room in terms of substantive changes that they might be making to housing, which isn't to say it
As,
won't stay a top topic.
as an aside, Bonnie, I would say that a number of the housing developments around the state now are being litigated in the court system. You see time after time developers now, in regard to the affordable housing aspect of it, basically challenging the municipalities who have basically turned them down. So there's a lot of action in our court system over housing.
It's funny, I never heard anything about it when I first joined the society, but as people are trying to fill spots, with people from out of state, there is an issue in terms of being able to get somebody, not only in terms of affordability, but in terms of availability. So I appreciate what you just shared with us. So this is an election year, and in Connecticut, that means a big election, lots of people. Would you like to fill everyone in on um, how best to put it? I'm going to say that not only what's going to be happening in November, but the impact it has on the this legislative session.
Yeah, so obviously, this is a midterm election for Congress. It's an actual election year for all statewide office holders, from the governor on down through the attorney general, and also for the entire General Assembly. As I talked about at the beginning of the call, um, our House and Senate isn't really different except in terms of the size of the districts that they represent. But they all serve on 2-year election cycles. It's not like at the federal level where you have, the senators serve 6-year terms and House members serve 2-year terms. In the Connecticut General Assembly, every elected member serves 2-year terms, and so they're all up for reelection this year. And that will color a lot of, what are they proposing? What do they want to have on their campaign mail? That type of stuff. And really, for the governor, especially because the sort of campaign agenda setting is top down. A lot of his policy proposals that you'll see come out today will reflect the sort of platform and values that he wants to run on for the upcoming election cycle. In terms of the actual election, Governor Lamont is running for a third term. He remains incredibly popular. I think his individual popularity rating still is in the low 60s or high 50s, which is very, very high for a governor. He's one of the most popular governors in the country. And so he is immediately the prohibitive favorite to win re-election. And the dynamics of that are not just his personal popularity, but also Connecticut is a traditionally blue state, but at a higher level too. You've seen with some recent special elections throughout the country, and I think some, the dynamics of any midterm election. A lot of prognosticators think that there's a blue wave that's going to cross the country in the upcoming election. And Connecticut, by no means, is going to be immune to that. What that means for the legislature, too, is that Democrats will, in all likelihood, pick up seats in both the House and the Senate. They already technically have supermajorities in both the House and the Senate, although it's a slim supermajorities. Those supermajorities will grow next year. The impact of that is that it becomes a lot more difficult for the governor, who is really a more moderate Democrat, especially on fiscal issues, to sort of hold the line against more progressive elements of the legislature, because they do have the ability technically to override him on any veto threat. In terms of other election or other election dynamics on the Republican side, there are 3 sort of top candidates right now. The first 2 that were in the field is a sitting state senator, Ryan Fazio from Greenwich, who is the current ranking member on the Energy Committee, and former New Britain Mayor Aaron Stewart, is also running. A new candidate who just came in is Betsy McCormick, who's been very involved in Republican national politics. She's a former lieutenant governor of New York. There's a lot of discussion right now whether, because she is very close with President Trump, whether she might get his endorsement and how effective or how that would play in the Republican primary. But those are the three most significant candidates running on the Republican side for governor. Again, though, it's the dynamics for any Republican candidate this year with a popular incumbent Democrat running and what is expected to be a blue year across the country are going to be very, very difficult. So I expect that Governor Lamont, in all likelihood, will probably win re-election, and you'll probably see larger majorities in both the House and the Senate.
Switching from the upcoming election to grassroots, we often encourage our members to engage as constituents when different issues come up. We've done that with the licensure pathways, with sales tax on services, et cetera. I would appreciate it if you would talk about the importance of grassroots and the timing, because when we hear from a legislator they want something, your turnaround time and then our turnaround time is significantly less than outside of the Capitol. Could you talk about the importance of grassroots and timing?
Let me talk for just a minute, having basically again been around state politics for way too long. I end up teaching Marty Looney's, Senator Looney's law school class down at Quinnipiac about lobbying and what has occurred over time, and it's fairly dramatic what has occurred over the span of my career, somewhat Bonnie's, and now Dallas's, where lobbying and trying to move public policy was really a top-down exercise. Where you had significant either business, labor, lobbyists who basically went to the leadership, the governor's office, and basically the rank and file at that point in time would follow what their message was. Over the course of the last 25 years, that's just changed dramatically. That it's much more a rather than top down, a bottom up system that we are now getting to, where Dallas and I like to think we're incredibly important, but we're probably less important than the voices of individuals and constituents in legislators' districts. Getting contacts into individual legislators' office has now become incredibly important. And these folks, unlike Congress, our legislators are still very attuned to their district. If they get 10 emails over a subject matter, they take notice. If they get 25, they get nervous. 50, and oh my God, they're in a panic. Now, obviously, there are different degrees, Bonnie, in regard to how you go about doing grassroots. The most impactful ones are obviously somebody who happens to be a neighbor of a legislator and knows that individual and feels they're going to give them he or she a call or write them a personal email about an issue. That gets attention. To the other extreme is basically, and there's a cottage industry, how you generate basically boilerplate emails into people's offices. That still has an impact, but not as much as obviously somebody who has a personal connection. But what Dallas and I and Joy Avalon have experienced over time is that the right individuals, let alone what we're saying and the information we impart, but the right individuals from legislators' home district contacting, having a conversation is incredibly important. these days. And all of you have probably seen there are all sorts of services, and grassroots has become a cottage industry as far as folks saying that we can generate X amount of contact and all like that. And that goes on, and that's important, and we've utilized it in the past. But I can't emphasize enough about the importance of folks willing to be involved, willing to basically take time to write a paragraph or two to their local legislator. It gets their attention. Dallas, what did I miss?
No, I think Craig did a great job summarizing, from a broad level, the impact of grassroots now, where email has made it easier than ever for different groups to impact their legislators because it's so easy to fire those off. And legislators themselves have become more empowered because, especially like social media tools and stuff, have made it where, Craig talked about that leadership down approach that has kind of eroded over time. And a big reason for that is that individual legislators simply have more tools available to them now through Twitter and Facebook, whatever the newest social media app is of the day, to have more of a direct dialogue with their individual constituents. But beyond those sort of greater grassroots things, one benefit of representing an association like this, where you guys range from, big accounting firms to small business accounting firms, or you might be in-house somewhere for a business, is you guys are actual constituents of legislators, and don't discount how important those individual relationships are. And I think a lot of people underestimate how accessible legislators are, especially if they're being reached out to by a constituent. There's one story that I know I think I've told on this call before, where we a few years ago, I can't remember what the issue was, but there was some critical CPA bill that we had gotten through the House, and we were trying to get through the Senate on the last night of session, which is sort of a white knuckle exercise, because the Senate does these really huge consent calendars where they can pass, dozens of bills in a matter of minutes, but it has to happen before midnight on sine die. And getting on one of those final consent calendars through the Senate can be incredibly challenging, even for a non-controversial issue. And we were having a tough time getting on the last sort of helicopter out of Saigon. And Bonnie was able to locate a individual CPA who had a personal relationship with a state senator, Derek Slapp, and at 11 o'clock at night called Derek and said, "This is absolutely critical for my industry. There should be no votes against it. Can you get us on the last consent calendar?" And because of that personal outreach, Senator Slapp was able to get us onto the last consent calendar. So when Bonnie puts out those requests for, grassroots, do you have a relationship with somebody? Those requests are real, and there's a real impact to what we do at the General Assembly, because sometimes it's that one phone call that can make a difference.
So one thing we ask people to do every year is, while you may not know your local member of the House or the Senate, it's never too late to start. So if they're having a coffee hour at one of your local cafes, or they're having a come talk to me open house type of thing at your town hall, etc., you don't have to have an issue. You can just stop in and introduce yourself. That makes a huge difference, because then when you do need to contact me and say, "I met you at your recent open house or at your coffee hour," etc., it doesn't have to be a lengty note. If you send them a note, it can just be introducing yourself and letting them know that you're there as a resource should they need one, because they do have questions of CPAs on occasion. Not frequently, but when our issues arise, we want them to reach out to us and our members. So that makes a big difference too. So just a reminder that we ask every year for those key contacts. And it doesn't mean that you're best friends with someone. It's someone that you know that you've got some sort of relationship with, whether your kids are on the same softball team, you attend the same synagogue, whatever the question, the contact, it's something. And that gets us much further than if we have nothing. But even if we don't have contacts, I want to remind people that we do use voter voice. We do send out to you these boilerplate different options to use, but we also ask you to customize them where possible. And that customization makes a huge difference than just sending it as the boilerplate. Either way, it helps us, but a little bit of time can make us so much more effective on your behalf. It's really it's significant. So we would ask you to, again, try to reach out to your local legislators. Oftentimes they're having meetings at the start of legislative session, in the middle, in the summer. They do it round I'm going to say all around the year at different times, but that touch makes a huge difference. So thank you very much for sharing that. It's 9:50.
I will, wait a minute. I will
Go ahead.
never forget. I will never forget when the proposal came up about sales tax on accounting services and was proposed. And we basically responded. And in 2 days, I had Kevin Sullivan, the president of the Senate, coming to me saying, call off the dogs. It's not going to happen. So, I mean, we have a pattern, we have history. It does work.
And I'll tell you, when you use that voter voice, we also ask you for your permission to turn that into a letter to the committee. So you hit your legislator, but if you say yes, we also then print those off, or now we email them and upload them into the committee's database, where they then show up with a name, in terms of, it'll have, Bonnie Stewart CPA, against. That list that we had that year for sales tax on services made everyone else that was showing up that day non-existent. So again, that response to our voter voice makes a huge difference. And then giving us permission to be able to use your letter to submit it to the committee when the hearing's being held is also extremely helpful. So another good point. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dallas. Well, I'm going to open it up. We've got 5 more minutes before we're going to end the session. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask today? Okay. Well, I'm going to just thank both Dallas and Craig again. These are 2 gentlemen I've worked with a long time. Actually, Craig is the one who taught me how to lobby years ago at my former organization. And worked very closely with him for years and years. And then we were thrilled to have Dallas join the team at Roy and Leroy and now become managing partners. So I just want to point out to you that we've got an incredible team. We've got, between these 2 gentlemen, Joy, Dallas has got 2 other lobbyists on the team as well. We've got 5 people that are boots on the ground for us on a daily basis up at the state capitol, as well as myself. When I'm needed, I go up there and testify and other things. So I want you to know that you're very well covered at the state capitol, which is really important because, as you know, the state legislators can have as much of an impact, if not bigger, on you and your clients than even the federal government can. So we appreciate your paying attention to state legislative and regulatory issues. Stay warm and have a great day.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, guys, for coming.